G'day everyone, let me show you how to remove and replace the background of this image in Photoshop. My name is Hoy and this video is the second in my background removal series. Because different subjects require different ways of removing backgrounds, we need a range of tools and techniques to make it the best selection to remove and replace backgrounds. So if you haven't already done so, make sure you check out my first video on background removal where I show you how to remove the background of a simple logo, as well as cut out this car and blend it onto another background. So no matter what you want to cut out, you can follow along using the exact images that I'm using. Links to the first video and the image that I'll be using in this video are in the description. Okay, so to get started, let's open the image by going to File, Open, navigate to the folder where you've got your image saved under, click on that and press Open. Now the first thing I'll do is just make the picture larger to fit it on screen by pressing Command 0. I'm going to unlock the background layer by pressing this padlock here, and then we'll rename this layer so we can keep track of it as we move along. So double click on the word layer 0, and I'm going to rename it to model and press return on my keyboard. I'm going to duplicate this by pressing Command J. It's always good to have a duplicate in case you need it in the future, but we also need it later on, so we'll just keep that in our back pocket for later. So I'm going to turn the model layer off for the time being. Now the next thing to do is to make a selection of the model so we can cut her out from the background. There's a range of techniques to do that, but in this situation, we'll be using Select Subject. So go to your selection tool here, or you can press W on your keyboard. When you've got your selection tool activated, it will show an option here called Select Subject. Before we click on the button, let's click on this chevron here and explain what the differences are. I've got mine ticked to Cloud, which basically means that the selection I'm choosing to make is via Adobe's Cloud, Adobe Sensei. This will result in a more detailed result, but it also might be a little bit slower. Now, if you have yours on device, it would be making a quicker selection, but it may not be as accurate as the Cloud. So if you want to follow along, click on Cloud and then hit Select Subject. Now Photoshop has made a selection. You can see that from the marching ants here. The next step is to make a mask out of this. So go to your mask layer icon here, press once here, and there we have the subject. The next thing we need to do is just to make sure that our mask is the best that we can make it. So let's create a new background so we can just see how well the mask has done. Go to your adjustment layer icon here, go all the way up to solid color. I'm just going to move my color picker up here and then just choose any color you want. I've got my hue set all the way down here. You can choose your colors by pressing this and moving this up and down. So I'm happy with any color and I'm going to choose this reddish hue here and then press OK. I'm going to move this down to below this layer here and I'm going to zoom in just to inspect how well the mask has done. So I'm going to press Option on my keyboard and then scroll wheel mouse up. Now I'm going to pan around the image to see the quality of the mask. And what I'm looking for is just to see this edge here, because generally the inside of this should be okay. Pressing spacebar on my keyboard and then just dragging it along, I'm just going to make a note of how well the mask has done. So it's done pretty well. Now you can see here, I'm just going to change my cursor into a move tool by pressing V, so you can see that better. I'm not sure whether it turns out on screen, but you can see there's a thin yellow halo here. So that's something that we need to remove. I'm going to pan up again, and this has caught my eye. Over here, there's an obvious correction that we need to make, as well as here. And then there's a tiny bit here as well. I'm just going to pan across, continue to pan across, and then there's some correction needed here. And her hair obviously needs to be corrected as well. There's a thin halo around her head. Her hair again is Still got a bit of yellow. Now hair is most difficult to mask out because it doesn't have a straight edge. It's very thin and wavy. So we'll save that to the last bit. So we'll continue painting around. Now I'm not sure whether you can see this yellow cast on the inside of the model's leg. This is something that we need to remove. It's coming from the background of the previous layer. Now we can sort of ignore that because when I zoom out by pressing Command 0, you can't really see it. But we want to be professionals, so we want to fix up every issue that we can see. So I'm going to zoom back in, Option on my keyboard and scroll wheel mouse up. So that's another thing that we need to fix. And again, there's a halo around her shoe here, which we'll fix. And the similar problem here. Let's zoom out and see the whole picture in full. So let's just summarize the issues that we found. Number one, there are halos around the model. It's so thin that a manual selection might be very difficult to do. So we'll use a special technique to do that. There are corners just under her arm here that needs to be fixed. Her hair still has yellow, and then there's a color cast along the inside of the model's leg. So let's fix that one by one, starting with the halo. So to fix the halo, we can manually, painstakingly brush out the very thin edge along the model's body, or we can use an automatic way by contracting the mask. Let's make sure our mask is selected by clicking once here, and go up to Select, go up to Filter, and go to Other, and select Minimum. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit, Option on my keyboard and scroll wheel mouse up. And this is the area that I'm talking about. You can just barely see the yellow outline. Make sure you've got preview on, and I'm just going to zoom out a bit. And before we adjust the radius, let's just talk about what preserve roundness means. Photoshop has got two options, squareness and roundness. So what roundness refers to is the type of objects that we want to make a selection of. So natural objects, human beings and fruits and anything natural, we should use roundness. Whereas the squareness option is mainly good for man-made objects which has straight lines, tables, chairs, cars, etc. And the difference of the two options is the precision of which we can reduce the mask or contract the mask. So if I select squareness and increase my radius just by pressing up on my keyboard, you can see that the increments are whole numbers. So it's 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm just going to go back all the way down. If I now pick roundness, you can see that it has a decimal place here. So my contractions of the mask can be a bit more accurate. In our case, because we're dealing with a natural object, well, a human being, let's choose roundness, and we're going to set our radius or how much we want to contract all the way back. And what I'm looking for as I'm dialing this slider across is just watching out for this. I'm not really interested in the number. So I'm going to slide it from left to right, and then once the line or the yellow halo disappears, that's where I'm going to stop. Something like this looks good. Well, some of you might be asking, why do I need to be that precise in my radius? Why can't I just zoom my slider all the way to the right? Well, let's just do that just to see what happens. Moving this across, I'm just going to pick a really large number, and you can see that the mask has contracted by a fair bit, cutting the model's arm and body off. That's why we can't be that careless about how much we want to contract. So I'm just going to move it back to, I think what we had it to 1.3. Just enough so the yellow outline or halo disappears. When I'm fine with that, let's press OK. Let's pan across to see whether the halo has gone. It's certainly gone from her arm. Now, the other part where it had a halo, if I remember correctly, was her hat. So let's just go up here to see whether the halo has gone. So the hat has gone. Well, the halo from the hat has gone. So I'm fairly confident that the halo has gone. So you can move around or pan around the picture to see if that has done its job. If it hasn't, you can always apply the filter again and just increase the amount. I'm going to fit this picture to screen just to see it from a distance again, Command 0. Now the next thing that we're going to fix is the little corners under her arm. So if I zoom in by pressing Option on the keyboard, scroll wheel mouse up, we've got these little bits here that unfortunately Photoshop didn't pick up. But fortunately, it's an easy fix. With my mask selected, I'm going to choose my brush tool, or you can press B on your keyboard. The brush size is way too big. I can resize it by pressing the left bracket key on the keyboard, which is next to the P on the keyboard. However, I prefer another shortcut, which is Control Option left click and then drag left on my mouse. And I want a hard brush. So with all those keys selected, Control Option left click, I'm going to scroll down on my mouse and you can see that it's increasing the hardness of my brush. I'm going to keep reducing it, Control Option left click and then drag left to a size that I want a teeny tiny brush. Something like this would be fine. Make sure my opacity is 100, flow at 100, and I can paint that in. Now, if that didn't work for you, just make sure that your foreground color is black. If it's not, you can either click on this and then selecting black and press OK. Or a quicker way is to press D on your keyboard, and that will reset your default colors to white and black. To switch the black from the background to the foreground, you can either select this toggle switch here or X on your keyboard. Now we can use the same technique to mask this out and then mask that out, but I'm going to show you a bonus tip, and that's using the smudge tool. Go onto your smudge tool here. By default, you probably see the blur tool here. If you do, just click and hold until you see the smudge tool and select that. And if you need to resize your smudge tool, Control Option left click and drag left, drag right. It works exactly as the brush tool. And then increase your hardness. I've got all those keys selected and then just dragging my mouse down to increase the hardness to 100. I'm going to reduce my brush size even more. Something like this. And then I'm just going to paint into that little corner here. And what that is doing is smudging that mask into that crevice there. Let me show you what it's done to the mask. I'm going to go to my mask, Option on my keyboard, and click on the mask here. And what it's doing is smudging in that black area into that crevice. Let's return to the original image by going to the mask, pressing on Option, and then clicking on the mask. We're going to use the same smudge tool technique in this little corner here, and then I'm just going to smudge it in here. Now there's no right or wrong as to which technique you use. I just find the smudge tool in this scenario to be a little bit better because I don't have to be as accurate as the brush tool in this scenario. Let's zoom back out to take stock of our image again. Command 0 on our keyboard. The next thing we'll fix is the color cast. Now, if you remember, there was a bit of yellow coming off the background and onto the model's inner thigh. So if I zoom in by pressing Option on my keyboard and scroll wheel mouse up, you can see that there's a bit of shading, yellow shading from the background. I'm going to pan up by pressing spacebar on my keyboard and dragging up. And you can see that there's a slight yellowish tinge here. So to fix that, we're going to color this bit in with the color of the rest of the trousers, the bluish color. Let's create a new layer by pressing this icon here. Go to our brush tool, or you can press B on your keyboard. I'm going to make sure that I've got a hard brush for this. So with Control Option left click on my mouse, I'm going to scroll all the way down to make sure that my hardness on the brush is 100%. I'm going to use the brush tool and temporarily convert that to an eyedropper tool by pressing Option on the keyboard and then clicking in an area of a similar color that I want. Now, if I start painting now, there'll be two issues, but instead of describing the issues, let's just see what happens. So immediately you can see there's two errors. One is that this color here, even though I've selected a color nearby, it doesn't blend in. It looks like somebody drew it on with crayon or something. The other issue is that the paint stroke or the brush stroke has gone outside the model's trousers. Both issues are fortunately easy to correct. So let's correct it one by one. First, the color. So we'll change the blend mode from normal all the way down to color. So what the color blend mode does is only use the hue and saturation of the new color, not the luminosity, not the brightness of the new color. That's why the color blend mode blends in much better than the normal blend mode. Now let's fix the coloring that's going outside the edge of the trousers. This is an easy way to fix it by clipping it to the mask. So with my layer 1 selected, I'm going to press the keyboard shortcut Command Option G. And you can see here the paint or brush stroke is now contained within the confines of the mask. I'm just going to paint this in now. Now what we should be doing is sampling small areas as we go and not just using one sample for the entire length of the trousers. Otherwise you would just get a large patch of the same color, which is what we don't want. So I'm just going to continue here. Now that looks fine. The other issue is that it's probably a bit stronger than I needed. So I'm going to reduce the opacity of that layer by coming here and then scrubbing to the left. I'm going to go to the point where I don't see the yellow. Something like 60 would do, I think, 59 even. I'm happy with that. I'm just going to pan around again. And obviously if there are other areas that needs to be corrected, then you can use exactly the same technique. Let's see the full image again by pressing Command 0 on our keyboard. The last masking correction that we need to do is to fix the model's hair. So if I zoom in onto her hair by pressing Option on the keyboard and scroll with mouse up and then just pan down, you can see that the yellow from the previous background has been embedded into her hair and not removed as good as the Adobe Cloud selection was. So let's fix that by making sure that we've got the model layer selected and then going to our selection tool. It doesn't matter what selection tool you've selected, it's just to bring up this option here called Select and Mask. Just give that a click and another window will come up called Select and Mask. Your view might be different to mine, so let's just go through a few key settings. I've got my view on overlay. Now, if you don't, you can choose any background you want. You can choose onion skin, marching ants, overlay, on black, etc. I just find for this scenario, overlay works for what we want. I'm just going to click out of this by pressing outside here. The opacity of that red of the background is set to 100. I've got color aware on, which just means that whatever we do when we're refining our hair, it's going to use color as a separation factor, as opposed to objects, finding differences in the object. The only thing that we want to do here in the Select Mask screen is to refine her hair. And funnily enough, Photoshop does have a refined hair brush. So it's all the way here. Make sure you've got a really small brush, something like 54. You don't need to copy me exactly, but to control the size, you can select this little chevron here. Something about 50 would be good. I've got it at 54. There's no right or wrong. The size of your brush just depends on how big the object is. Generally, what I find for hair is that a small-ish brush does the job. Make sure your hardness is set to 0 and everything else can stay the same. So what I'm going to do here is just to go around the perimeter of her hair, not quite touching her hair, and then click and drag along her hair to make a selection. Now, I don't want the brush to sort of go on her hair. And the reason is that if the brush goes on her hair, in my experience, it sort of erases some of her hair. All I want to do is erase the yellow fringe that's contaminating her hair. However, in these areas here, you can't really avoid touching the hair, so we need to just go in there, just remove it. But where we don't need to touch her hair, we can just go as close as possible, and that looks okay. I'm going to do it to the other side here. Now this looks fairly decent. The extra boost is something called decontaminate colors. So I'm going to go here, scroll down, and there's a option called decontaminate colors, which just means that any areas of yellow that we see in the model's hair, it will try to take out. So let's just click on that. And that just makes it look so much better. Let's output this to a new layer with the layer mask and then press OK. Now the model's hair looks awesome, doesn't it? It doesn't have any yellow fringing anymore. Now what you can see here is that Photoshop has made a new layer with a new layer mask here. So we don't need this one that we created before. So we're going to delete that by clicking and dragging it onto our trash can here so we don't get confused about which layer we're going to use. I'm going to zoom out, fit it to screen by pressing Command 0 on my keyboard. I can change the color of the background by double-clicking on this solid color icon and then just choosing any color I want. Isn't that fantastic? I'm going to leave it on the original color and press OK. But as good as this is, the image looks a bit flat. She's like floating on air. So originally I was going to finish up the tutorial here, but I couldn't. I needed to make it a little bit more realistic. So let's add some shadows to ground her into the picture. Now the best way to create shadows is actually to use the one from the original photo. So this is why we duplicated the model layer, so we had an extra copy of it to replicate the shadows from. I'm going to resize my property panel just to see a bit more of my layers panel here. If you remember, this is the original model layer here. I'm going to move this up by clicking and dragging it in between this layer here. I'm going to create a inverted layer mask, option on the keyboard, and then clicking on the mask icon here. Now the next thing to do is to desaturate this model image here by clicking on this eyeball here. Click on the image, go to Image, Adjustments, go all the way down to Desaturate. Now, if you want for keyboard shortcuts like I am, it's Command-Shift-U. And that has turned the image into black and white. So what we'll do now is to paint over the mask with white to reveal the shadows in the black and white layer. So with our mask selected, let's change our blend mode from normal to multiply, and that will change whatever we brush over into a darker image. Let's go to our brush tool here. Again, it's B on your keyboard. I'm going to resize my brush, Command Option left click and then drag right to a bit bigger so I can use it. And then I'm going to increase the softness by going up. Let's reduce our flow to something like 10%. Flow is basically, if you can think of it like how much ink will come out of the brush. I'm going to press enter here. And the final thing to do is I'm going to switch my background, which is black, to white. I'm going to press that toggle switch here. With the mask selected, I'm going to just to paint over the area where the shadow was. I'm going to resize my brush again and then continue on. Now let's use the original image as a reference to where all the shadows were. Let's deactivate this mask by pressing Shift and clicking on that mask. You can see that there are shadows around her legs here and then up the top here. So that's what we'll replicate. I'm going to activate the mask again by pressing Shift click and then going to paint that over something like this. Now, admittedly, this doesn't look great, does it? It looks like some child has sort of smudged their photo, but there's one more step that we need to do. We're going to actually lighten what we've just done. We're going to use a curves adjustment layer to do that. So go to our adjustment layer icon, go up to curves. I'm going to increase the size of my properties panel here just by dragging it down here. And what we're going to do is to make the whites even brighter. So using this slider here, I'm going to click and drag to a point where I think the shadow is light enough. Now the problem is that we need to clip this effect so it only affects the shadow areas. So let me just move this back up. So who can remember how to clip a layer to the one underneath it? Yep, you've got it. It's Command Option G. So make sure your curves layer is selected and then press Command Option G. And that will limit the effect of the curves just to the shadow area. Let's go back to our curves. I'm just going to make more room for myself by pushing this down again. And let's just do that once more. So something like this looks good. And a subtle effect is what I'm after. So something like this. Let's resize this again. And let's just turn it on and off to see the effect that it has. So this is with the shadow effect, and this is without the shadow effect. And you can see that with the shadow effect, the model is a bit more grounded. She's more in the scene than just simply floating on air. And the great thing about all these adjustments is that if I suddenly don't like the color of the background, remember I can change the color by simply clicking on this icon here, and let's just change it however I like. Isn't that great? Now let's just go over what we've learned so far. I'm going to turn off the visibility of all these layers and return it to the starting point. So we started off with a model layer like this, and then we created a mask. We then put another background onto that, and there were a number of issues with the mask, if you recall. One was that there was a halo around her, which we fixed using the minimum filter. The other one was there were masks that wasn't correct underneath her arms and just around here. We used the brush tool to brush it out, as well as an awesome technique using the smudge tool just to smudge in the background again. We also fixed the yellow cast along the inside of her leg, and then used select and mask to fix her hair. We discovered a magical option called decontaminate colors in select and mask. And after all that, we weren't happy with the model just floating on the air, so we painted in the shadows. And because the shadows were too harsh, we created a curves adjustment layer just to brighten up the brights. And that's how you remove and replace the background of this image in Photoshop. I hope you found this useful. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite technique is or what you would like to see in future videos. Please like and subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can get notified for when the next video is out.